Welcome everyone to Understanding End Times Part 8. Today we're going to get into some specific things that are going on in the world right now and how these relate to when Jesus is going to come back. So the date today is June 23rd, 2020. Now, I tell you that because I want to timestamp where America and the world are at this moment. We are seeing current events that were prophesied thousands of years ago in the Bible taking place today. Let me say it this way. The world is headed for a disaster of biblical proportions. Old Testament, real wrath of God type stuff. Fire and brimstone coming down from the skies, rivers and seas boiling, 40 years of darkness, earthquakes, volcanoes, the dead rising from the grave, human sacrifice, dogs and cats living together, mass hysteria. Now, any of you who are movie buffs will know that's from the movie Ghostbusters. But just reading some of that and seeing what is taking place right now, it just makes us all think, is the end of the world near? So what I want to look at today is signs of the end times. Now, let me give you a definition for the word signs. The word sign means an event whose occurrence indicates the probable occurrence of something else. So things that we can see right now that are indicating things that are going to happen in the future. The Bible indicates that God has provided us with numerous signs to give us knowledge of upcoming events. So let's look at some of those tonight, and this is probably going to take a couple lessons to actually go through everything. But let's start out in 2 Timothy 3, verses 1 through 5. 2 Timothy 3, 1 through 5. And Paul is telling this to Timothy. He says, "But know this, that in the last days perilous times will come. For men will be lovers of themselves, lovers of money, boasters, proud, blasphemers, disobedient to parents, unthankful, unholy, unloving, unforgiving, slanderers, without self-control, brutal, despisers of good, traitors, headstrong, haughty, lovers of pleasure rather than lovers of God, having a form of godliness but denying its power, and from such people turn away." Now, just reading that list, does that not sound like everything that we are dealing with today? So let me break this down and let's get a little bit more specific. First of all, he says at the beginning, know this. So let's look at that word know. The word know there means realize the facts, come to recognize what is happening. So Paul is telling Timothy almost 2,000 years ago that I want you to observe what is taking place, because he says that in the last days, perilous times will come. Now, when he says last days there, because they were in the last days, even back when Paul was talking to Timothy here, because the last day started with Jesus appearing on the earth, but that word last days there means last of the last days. So this is like the final moment here. He says, in the last days, perilous times will come. Now, let me give you the definition for the word perilous there. The word perilous means dangerous, hard to bear, hazardous, risky. Literally, it means exposure to injury, loss, or destruction. So Paul is saying to recognize, come to grips with what is happening in the last of the last days. Perilous or dangerous, hard to bear, hazardous, risky days are coming on this planet. You are going to be exposed to injury, loss, and destruction. That could be like the nightly news right now with what's going on. Then he goes on and he begins to talk about characteristics of dangerous people that are going to appear during these last of the last days. So I'm going to go through these kind of quick, but I want you to have just a surface knowledge of what this is talking about. First of all, it says men will be lovers of themselves. That refers to people who are willing to sacrifice all on the altar of self-indulgence. So they are so caught up with themselves that they're willing to sacrifice their health, they're willing to sacrifice their children, their marriage, even their sanity, just to please themselves. And we see that all over. People who only think about themselves, they don't care about any other people. Then it talks about people who will be lovers of money. Now, this is something that's been around for a long time, but lovers of money refer to people who have an insatiable greed for riches. All right? They're never satisfied. They have to keep getting more. Again, this isn't something new, but we can probably say we're seeing it on a level that maybe we've never seen it before. Then it talks about boasters. Boasters, definition for that, an empty pretender, an imposter. So someone who is pretending to be something that they are not. Next, it talks about people who are proud. Definition for that, showing oneself above others. Arrogant, treating others with contempt. So again, pride. The Bible talks about pride puffs up. We're not supposed to be prideful people. We need to recognize who we are. And again, when you're ultra pride, then you are placing yourself above God. Lucifer, who ultimately becomes Satan, his origin of sin was based on pride. He said, I will exalt my throne above the Most High. So he got into pride. Now he's trying to get us into pride and elevate ourselves above God as well. Next, it talks about blasphemers. Blasphemers, that means to speak injuriously at God. It refers to slanderous and also abusive people. So it's interesting that prideful people elevate themselves against God, and then blasphemers actually speak injuriously at God. Disobedient to parents. All right, again, nothing new, but it's at a level now that we've never seen. That means unpersuadable. These are children who are unpersuadable, stubborn, not compliant. It used to be, you may not care for your parents, but you weren't outwardly disrespectful to them. Now we see people using profanity against their parents, even being abusive to their parents. Again, these are all things that the Bible prophesied would take place. Next, unthankful. That means ungrateful. And it's based on a sense of entitlement. Wow, that's a big, huge issue right now. People feel they are entitled to certain things. And as a result of it, they're not thankful. They're not grateful. They're unthankful because they feel like they're not getting what they're supposed to be getting. Next, unholy. The word unholy, people who are profane, irreverent, wicked. Man, again, just turn on the news right now and we see profane people. We see wicked people walking around. Next, unloving. This is an interesting word. This word unloving here means no love of kindred, especially of parents for children and children for parents, hard-hearted. So what we're seeing today is almost this breakup among the family unit where parents don't care about their children, children don't care about their parents. There's not this natural love that you should have for one another. Next, unforgiving. That word unforgiving here means truce breakers, untrue to their promises. So these are people that say they're going to do one thing, but they don't follow through. They don't care. They're intentionally trying to deceive people. Which brings us to our next characteristic, slanderers. Slanderers. This means people who utter and declare what is untrue with an intent to deceive. So they know what they're saying isn't true. Their whole focus is purposely trying to deceive people. Now again, based on where we are in the world right now, June 23rd, 2020, we coin a phrase which we refer to as fake news. And basically, that came about saying that the media as a whole is purposely putting out things that they know aren't true to slant people toward their point of view. Again, that's a huge thing in the world right now where we live. Next, without self-control. Oh, this is interesting. Defined, this means unrestrained. People who are unrestrained. They are just going to do whatever they want to do, lacking in moderation or control, especially in the area of sexual gratification. Again, defines a lot of people in the world today. Next, brutal. The Bible says in the last days, there will be brutal people. That word brutal means fierce. It means savage. I can't tell you how many documentaries there are right now on people who have just brutalized other human beings. And again, we're seeing a lot of things in the news right now of brutal people. Next, despisers of good. That means those who are opposed to goodness and good men. So they don't care about what's good. They actually want to perpetrate evil. Next, traitors. This is a person who betrays another person, cause, or trust. A person who betrays another person, cause, or trust. Next, headstrong. Someone who is headstrong signifies rash, reckless, violent, destructive people. Now, I'm going to give you a list in a little while of violent things that are taking place right now on our streets. And again, just looking at how these Bible prophecies that were written thousands of years ago are taking place today on a level that is just uncomprehendable to even think of something like that. Next, haughty. The word haughty means high-minded, to be puffed up, conceited. Just watch some of the TV shows that are on right now, and you will see an ultimate display of conceit among a lot of television celebrities. And then finally, lovers of pleasure. That phrase, lovers of pleasure, means loving the gratification of the natural desire or sinful desire more than loving God. Let me say that again. Loving the gratification of the natural desire or sinful desire more than loving God. Literally, it means sensual delight or lust. All right, let's go over to Luke 17, and we're going to look at verses 26 and 28 from the New King James Version. Luke 17, 26 and 28. It says, when the Son of Man returns, it will be like it was in Noah's day, and the world will be as it was in the days of Lot. So here, the Bible says when Jesus returns, it's going to be similar to the way it was in Noah's time and Lot's time. Now, why would he pick those two specific individuals? Because it was at each of those times in history that God brought his wrath down upon the earth to destroy a certain amount of wickedness that was taking place. So, in both Noah's time and in the days of Lot, wickedness and sexual immorality were rampant, especially adultery, fornication, homosexuality. Right now, in our day and age, we have something called gender dysphoria. This didn't even exist back then in Noah and Lot's time, at least not that we were aware of. But I looked up gender dysphoria just because, again, I like definitions. But secondly, I just wanted to make sure that I was accurately portraying what it was. And this is the definition for gender dysphoria: a psychiatric classification of the discordance between gender identity and one's biological sex at birth. So, what it's basically saying is there can be confusion based on what people biologically were born as compared to how they identify themselves as. So we have a lot of that going on, again, in the world today. People may be born a male, but they say, well, I don't identify as a male, I identify as a female, or vice versa. A couple other things to think about, again, just looking at the mindset of the last days on the earth will be like Noah and Lot. 2001, the first openly gay minister was ordained by the Presbyterian Church. And this, at that time, was considered by many to be a symbol of hope. Let me tell you something else. Again, these are just things that people send me that when I first get it, I find it hard to believe. But I research this out for you so that you get truth and not just speculation or my opinion. There is something on TV, the internet specifically, called the Drag Queen Story Hour or Drag Queen Story Time. And these are supposed to be children's events that first started in 2015 by author and activist Michelle Tia in San Francisco, with the goals to inspire a love of reading while teaching deeper lessons on diversity, self-love, and an appreciation of others. So basically what would happen, and this normally took place in a library, is kids would gather into a library and a drag queen would come and read stories to them. Now, I'm not going to get into a lot of politics here on what I think of these things. I'm just presenting to you some things that are taking place that, again, would be reminiscent of what we would call the days of Noah or the days of Lot. Now, a person by the name of Kitty Demure is actually a drag queen. And I'm going to read to you what this drag queen has to say about drag queen story time. So this is from a drag queen herself or himself, however they identify, I don't know. But I apologize for some language. I'm just reading the way that it's written here. What in the hell has a drag queen ever done to make you have so much respect for them? Other than put on makeup and jump on the floor and writhe around and do sexual things on stage. Would you want a stripper or porn star to influence your child? It makes no sense at all. A drag queen performs in a nightclub for adults. There's a lot of filth that goes on, and backstage there's a lot of nudity, sex, and drugs. Honestly, you're not doing the gay community any favors. In fact, you're hurting us. We've already had a reputation of being pedophiles and being perverts and being deviants. We don't need you to bring your children around. So keep your kids at home or take them to Disneyland or Chuck E. Cheese. But if you need your child to be entertained by a big human in a costume or in makeup, take them to the circus or something. Don't ruin your child's life or don't ruin us, because that's what you're doing. Now, that is one drag queen addressing this whole concept of drag queen story time. Again, maybe some of you watching this have never even heard that this kind of thing exists, but you can go on YouTube and Google it and see it for yourself. All right, let's look at a couple other things. June 15th, 2020, so just last week, the U.S. Supreme Court has redefined the meaning of sex under the Civil Rights Act to include gender identity and sexual orientation. So, just so people understand, the judicial system is constitutionally charged with interpreting the law, not making the law. Now, one of the main judges that went along with this new law, Judge Alito, says that courts should update old statutes so that they better reflect the current values of society. I find that interesting, that basically what he's saying is that we should be willing to change our laws based on the culture at that moment. I don't know about you, but I am glad that the Bible reflects absolute truth. That means when I say absolute truth, we're talking about truth that does not change according to culture or society. These are truths that God established and they last forever. That's something you can depend on. Now, let's go over to Matthew 24 and we're going to look at verse 12. Matthew 24, verse 12. I'm going to read this from the New King James Version. And it says this, "And because lawlessness will abound, the love of many will grow cold." So the Bible, again, looking at one of the signs to look at during the last days, it says lawlessness will abound. The word abound there means to be increased or to multiply. Now again, lawlessness has been around forever, but it is going to increase or multiply at a greater level during the last days. Let me give you the definition for lawlessness. The word lawlessness means contempt and violation of law. Contempt and violation of law. So, I'm going to read you some things that are going on right now. Again, just to remind you, because some of you may, who knows when this may be watched. This is June 23rd, 2020, when I am talking right now. America is facing a full societal breakdown. First of all, we just got through spending a couple months in lockdown in our homes dealing with COVID-19, or originally the coronavirus. So people were in lockdown. We were just coming out of that, and then something pretty horrific happened. It was the death of George Floyd. A black man was murdered by a white police officer. And as a result of that, it has sent our country in a chaotic state. Social justice is now becoming social disorder. Now, I am not going to comment on any of these things or what I think of them. I am basically giving you examples of what is taking place currently that would be defined from what the Bible prophesied thousands of years ago as lawlessness. The White House was placed under lockdown due to protests. There is riots and looting all over America. The New York City Mayor, Bill de Blasio, tells people, now this is the mayor of a city in America, take your anger out on those who hold the power. Mayor. On May 30th, 2020, this was on the internet. I'm here and the city of Atlanta is under attack. These people are starting fires and looting, and they are not from here. This was a Twitter post. So basically, what she's saying is that people were shipped into Atlanta to cause this destruction. June 4th, 2020. Protesters and rioters incensed by the death of George Floyd destroyed at least 16 memorials and statues in Boston, including one dedicated to black soldiers. Graffiti was found at the base of other statues in the park, including the George Washington statue, the 9/11 memorial, and the Soldiers and Sailors Monument atop a hill on Boston Common. June 6, 2020, former NYPD commissioner claims 600 officers considering exit from the force amid George Floyd protests. June 11, 2020, fires burned, a band played, and people danced as a crowd dismantled a Virginia Confederate monument. One of several destroyed this week across the country amid protests over the police-involved death of George Floyd. In total, 4 Confederate statues on the Portsmouth Monument, believed to stand at a site where slaves were once punished at a whipping post, were beheaded, and one was pulled down using a tow rope Wednesday night, according to the Virginian Pilot. Again, lawlessness taking place in our country right now. June 16th, 2020, in Minneapolis, at least 7 officers have resigned with more in process. Atlanta, 19 officers have resigned since the protests began. South Florida, 10 officers resigned from their city SWAT unit over concerns for safety. June 20th, just a couple days ago, 2020, rioters in California tear down the statue of Ulysses S. Grant. Grant, a Republican who served as America's 18th president, played a key role in helping then-President Abraham Lincoln win the Civil War. Grant also aggressively went after the Ku Klux Klan. The property destruction and looting during some of the protests over George Floyd's May 25th death will cost insurers at least $25 million, and that's in Minnesota alone. So the Bible predicted during the last days that lawlessness will abound. I don't know of any other time in our country's history where we have seen the increase of lawlessness that we are seeing right now. So that scripture again, Matthew 24:12. And because lawlessness will abound, the love of many will grow cold. Let's just look at that phrase for a minute. The love of many will grow cold. We are dealing with an extreme issue right now of racism. And racism breeds hate. God hates racism. He created every one of us in His image and His likeness, and He loves all people. All right, let's go over to Matthew 24, and let's look at verses 3 through 8. Matthew 24, 3 through 8, and let's look at what Jesus had to say about this. It says, "Now as he," speaking of Jesus, "sat on the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him privately, saying, 'Tell us, when will these things be? And what will be the sign,'" there's that word sign, "'of your coming and the end of the age?'" So this is a question we all want to know right now. Well, they asked Jesus this, and Jesus answered and said to them, "Take heed that no one deceives you. For many will come in my name, saying, 'I am the Christ,' and will deceive many. And you will hear of wars and rumors of wars. See that you are not troubled, for all these things must come to pass. But the end is not yet. For nation will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom, and there will be famines, pestilences, and earthquakes in various places. All these are the beginning of sorrows." So, what signs should we be looking for before you come back? That's what the disciples were asking Jesus. And he gave them a list: false prophets, wars, famines, pestilences, and earthquakes. Now, let's look at these. First of all, false prophets. People who are going to show up and say, "I am the Christ." Now, one of the things that you need to understand, if you don't already, is that the Jewish people are still waiting for their Messiah to appear. They did not accept that Jesus was their Messiah. So they are still waiting for a Messiah. So obviously, when people show up and say, "I am the Christ," they are going to be looking at these people determining, well, is it that one? Now, with that said, most of us would think if somebody showed up on the earth right now and said they were the Christ, who would believe that? But let me give you one case example. There was a gentleman named Jose Luis de Jesus Miranda in Miami. He claimed to be the returned phase of Jesus Christ and the Antichrist. So that's interesting. It wasn't enough that he was Jesus, he was also the Antichrist as well. I guess it depends what side of the bed he got out of. All right. His followers showed their support by getting 666 tattooed on their bodies. Now, he died in 2013, which kind of defeats the point that he said he was the Christ. But his followers say he didn't really die. He's immortal. So again, people will follow almost anything. Then the Bible says wars and rumors of wars. All right, now again, there's been wars throughout history. But let me give you a few statistics. Prior to the 20th century, there had never been a war with 1 million fatalities. However, World War I, 8.2 to 21 million died. World War II, 52 to 85 million died. That was considered the largest and deadliest war. There are current wars in Afghanistan, Pakistan, Somalia, Iraq, Syria, Yemen, Libya, North Korea is always a constant threat. Then January 2nd, 2020, this year, the U.S. killed the Iran leader, which many thought that might lead to a world war. January 28th, 2020, the new ISIS leader declares war on Israel. And his basic slogan, attack the Jews and slaughter them. So again, these wars are just becoming more and more frequent. Famine is another sign that Jesus gave that the end of the world would be coming. There are approximately 842 million people who suffer from hunger worldwide. That's almost 12% of the world's population of 7.1 billion people. Now, here's something very interesting that was brought to my attention that I wouldn't have believed had I not Googled it and found it myself. The United Nations set up a resolution on September 13th, 1990. So this has been around for a while. It's just, I don't think a lot of people know about it. It was set up as a result of a famine situation in Iran and Kuwait. And it was formed to regulate food in urgent situations. So if there's something that is critical going on in the world, then this organization will make a determination as to who gets food and who doesn't. All right, that all sounds, all right, I guess. You really can't find anything wrong with that. However, let me tell you what it is called. It is called the United Nations Security Council Resolution 666. You heard me correct. The United Nations Security Council Resolution 666. Anyone who knows anything about end times knows that 666 is the number of the Antichrist or the beast. It is not a good thing. Now, I'm not going to get into a lot of it right now, but I want you to think about during the tribulation, there is going to be a time where unless you take the mark of the beast, which is placed on your hand or your forehead, and it signifies that you now worship the Antichrist, you will not be able to purchase food. So it is interesting that this resolution then will determine who gets food and who doesn't. And this was formed in 1990. Interesting. All right, another characteristic that will take place in the end times, or a sign that we should be looking at, is pestilences. Pestilences. Now, what's a pestilence? It is a fatal epidemic disease. Now, some of you already know what's going on in the world right now. But in 1918, they had the Spanish flu, where 20 to 50 million people died as a result of it. 50 years ago, no one had ever heard of AIDS. But that came along and ended up killing 39 million people. The Ebola virus was extremely deadly, and 50% of people that get that die. And then we have something going on right now that started as the coronavirus. Now, I'm going to read something to you because I was talking to a group of people on January 22nd, 2020, this year. And corona had just come out or come to our attention a couple days prior. So the coronavirus originated in China. They were saying back then that it has the same kill rate as the Spanish flu. Again, I'm reading what was projected on January 22nd, 2020. For every 50 infected, one will die. At that time, 10,000 to 15,000 people were affected, and 500 people had died of it at that point. There were 200 cases in the United States. Since then, we are now basically 6 months later. Coronavirus has now been changed to be called COVID-19. There are currently 9,255,627 confirmed cases as of an hour ago when I looked up the stats. So in January, there were only 10 to 15,000 cases. Almost 6 months later, 9,255,627 cases. As a result of that, 475,907 people have died. And in the United States, there has been 2,400,000 257 cases in the U.S. Again, one of the signs to look for that the end of time is coming quickly is pestilences, and we are seeing a huge outbreak with COVID-19. As of right now, there is still no cure for this disease, and we are looking at, in America, kind of the second wave hitting soon. So that's what's happening right now. Another sign to look at: earthquakes, natural disasters. Again, these things have always occurred, but they are occurring at an alarming rate greater than ever. January 8th, 2020, we witnessed the Australian fires. At that time, 32,400 square miles had been destroyed, which is just a tad smaller than the state of Indiana. 1,000 homes, 24 people died as a result of it. January 7th, 2020, the Puerto Rico earthquake. $3.1 billion in economic loss. 300,000 homes were without water. The top 10 worst earthquakes have all occurred after 1906. And the worst hurricane ever, Katrina, was in the year 2005. So the Bible says, look for these signs. Begin to pay attention when these things begin to occur. But look what he says. When they begin to come, he says the end is not yet. It is the beginning of sorrows. Now, Jesus was speaking to a certain group of people, and he said, when you begin to see these things, see that you are not troubled. The word troubled there means frightened or alarmed. Frightened or alarmed. So Jesus tells us not to be frightened or alarmed. He's saying this is not the end, but it is signs of the end, the beginning of sorrows. Again, we have learned that if you are a faithful Christian, that you don't have to worry about anything that is coming upon the earth, because you are going to be part of what we call the great escape or the rapture. So we don't have to be frightened. The Bible tells us in Timothy, God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of power and of love and a sound mind. When you are operating in fear, you are not operating with a sound mind. But we can have a sound mind when we have knowledge of what's going to take place. All right, the Bible already warned us these things are coming. This just gives us comfort that Jesus is coming soon. Now, let me end with this. He says, when these things begin to take place, this is the beginning of sorrows. That word sorrows means intolerable anguish. Intolerable anguish in reference to the dire calamities preceding the return of Jesus Christ. So these things are going to happen. All right, there's nothing we can do to stop them. But he says, do not worry, because you know the truth. All right, I'm going to end there. There is some other things that we are going to look at on the next lesson. I want to tell you some things that the Jewish people have been looking at from a biblical perspective that are signs or indications to them that their Messiah is coming. We know that their Messiah who is coming is actually Jesus, who's already come, and he is going to be returning. So a lot of good things coming up. Make sure if you like the video, please press like. That helps me out. Also, subscribe to this channel, and you can hit the notification bell, and every time a new video comes out, you will be notified so that it will keep you in track. God bless you. See you next time.